It was a quiet night, one that seemed ordinary at first, but everything changed in an instant. Officer Brian Jenkins, a seasoned cop, had no idea that the woman he was about to stop would turn his world upside down. What began as a routine stop turned into something far more dangerous and mysterious. But as the truth started to unravel, Jenkins realized this was no ordinary encounter. Something much bigger was at play, and he was now a part of it. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with more gripping stories like this. The night was thick with mist as Officer Brian Jenkins cruised down the darkened streets. His headlights illuminated the empty roads as his eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the shadows lurking in every corner. He had been working late again, patrolling the streets in the city's most unpredictable district. It was a job he didn't particularly love, but it was steady, and in his line of work that's all that mattered. His patrol car hummed as it rolled past alleyways and dimly lit street corners, his gaze instinctively locking onto every pedestrian he passed. He was always on high alert. People out this late, alone, were often up to no good, at least in his experience. That's when he saw her. A woman, walking briskly along the sidewalk. She was dressed in a dark hoodie, her face mostly hidden under a cap. He didn't know why, but something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or the fact that she was moving quickly, almost like she had somewhere important to be. Maybe it was just his gut feeling. Without hesitation, Jenkins flicked on the sirens and pulled over to the curb, his car screeching to a halt beside the woman. She stopped, startled, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone as she turned to face the flashing lights. The woman was tall, maybe in her late 20s, with sharp features and an air of quiet confidence. Jenkins opened his door and stepped out, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. He approached the woman with purpose, his boots crunching the gravel beneath his feet. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his tone more brusque than polite. "I need to ask you a few questions. Step over here." The woman didn't immediately comply. Instead, she raised an eyebrow as if sizing him up. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with an edge. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," Jenkins replied, his tone now harder. "I need to search you." "Fit the description," she repeated, her eyebrows knitting together. "What exactly does that mean?" Jenkins felt his patience slip. "You're walking alone late at night, and we've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Just cooperate, and we'll be done quickly." She seemed to pause, weighing her options, but before she could say anything, Jenkins stepped closer, his hand moving toward his holster. His intent was clear. The search was happening whether she agreed or not. "What are you doing?" the woman asked, her voice rising slightly now. "I don't need to be searched. I haven't done anything wrong." "You've been warned," Jenkins snapped. "Now turn around and face the car." The woman didn't move. Instead, she stared at him, her jaw clenched. "No," she said, her voice cold. Something in Jenkins snapped. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm as he spun her toward the car. She resisted, her body tensing as she pulled against him. For a split second, she seemed like she was going to break free. But then, with a swift movement, Jenkins twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her against the car's hood. "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice sharp with fury. The officer's grip tightened, and he leaned in close. "You're under arrest for resisting," he growled, his breath hot against her neck. But just as Jenkins began to push further, something unexpected happened. The woman, who had been struggling just moments ago, suddenly relaxed, her body going completely still. The tension in the air shifted, and for a fleeting moment, Jenkins thought he saw something in her eyes, something that made him pause. Was it amusement? Before he could process it, the woman's voice broke through the quiet tension. "You think I'm just some regular woman you can bully?" she asked, her tone surprisingly calm. Jenkins froze. He had dealt with resistance before, but there was something different about her now. He had expected her to fight, to scream, to break down, but instead she was looking at him like she could see straight through him. "Let me go," she said, this time her voice steady and commanding. Jenkins' grip loosened, and for the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Something wasn't right here. The woman turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. Her gaze was piercing, almost unnerving. Jenkins opened his mouth to say something, but stopped when he noticed the small smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're not who you think I am," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jenkins stepped back, his mind racing. He couldn't explain it. Was it the way she spoke? The way she carried herself? His gut told him there was more to this woman than met the eye. Suddenly, the woman's phone buzzed in her pocket. The noise cut through the silence between them, and she pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Jenkins watched her every move, unsure of what was happening, but knowing that something big was unfolding. She raised the phone to her ear and spoke calmly, as though she were having a conversation with an old friend. "Yes, I'm fine," she said, her eyes never leaving Jenkins' stunned face. "I'll be there shortly." Without another word, she slid the phone back into her pocket and turned to face him once again. "You should let me go," she said, her voice now smooth and filled with quiet authority. Jenkins felt the unease grow inside him. He had never felt this way before, like he was in over his head. This wasn't a regular stop. This woman, she wasn't just any ordinary citizen. There was something else at play here, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. "Just let me go," she repeated. Jenkins blinked, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He glanced at her one last time before he took a step back. Slowly, reluctantly, he unclipped his handcuffs and dropped them to his side. He didn't know why, but he did it. The woman straightened up, her eyes still locked on him, and she gave him a nod. "You're free to go," Jenkins said, his voice low. He was still unsure of everything, of her, of the situation. But he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. As the woman walked away from Officer Jenkins, her footsteps were soft on the cold pavement. But to him, each one echoed like a drumbeat in the silent night. He stood frozen, staring after her, his mind buzzing with questions he couldn't answer. What had just happened? How had she turned the tables on him so effortlessly? Something about her had unsettled him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was far from over. Jenkins climbed back into his patrol car, his fingers gripping the steering wheel, but his mind still focused on the mysterious woman. He looked into the rearview mirror, watching her figure disappear into the distance. Was she really just a regular citizen, or was there something more, something he wasn't seeing? His radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Unit 23, come in. We've got a situation on Oak Street. Respond ASAP." The dispatcher's voice pulled him out of his thoughts, and without hesitation, Jenkins slammed his foot on the accelerator, speeding down the road. His mind was still clouded, but he couldn't afford to focus on that now. Duty called. As he sped through the streets, the flashing lights from the radio tower blinked ominously in the distance. He didn't know why, but the closer he got, the more uneasy he felt. It was as though the air itself had thickened, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He was a professional. He couldn't let distractions get in the way. The Oak Street neighborhood was quiet, too quiet for a street that was usually bustling. The streetlights cast long shadows over the sidewalk, and the houses, dark and lifeless, seemed to stare back at him. Jenkins slowed his car as he approached the block where the incident had been reported. His headlights flickered briefly, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned cars and empty streets. He parked his vehicle at the curb and stepped out, his boots crunching against the frost. He could hear nothing but the sound of his own breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved toward the alley that led to Oak Street, instinctively reaching for his radio. "Unit 23 reporting. I'm on scene." "Over. Copy that, Unit 23. Be advised, we have a civilian involved in a possible confrontation. Proceed with caution." "Roger that," Jenkins responded, his voice steady, though the tension in his gut was mounting. He entered the alley, the shadows seeming to grow longer and more menacing as he moved deeper into the darkened corridor. The faint sound of voices reached his ears, and as he approached the corner he could make out two figures standing in the dim light of the street lamp. Jenkins froze, recognizing one of them immediately. It was her, the woman from earlier. His heart skipped a beat. What was she doing here? The woman was standing across from a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his hands clenched into fists. His face was twisted with anger, his voice rising in a heated argument with her. Jenkins couldn't make out the words, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Get out of here, lady," the man shouted, his voice raw with fury. "You don't belong here." The woman stood her ground, her arms crossed in front of her, her expression calm but unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, her voice surprisingly smooth and controlled. "This is my business now. You're the one who needs to leave." Jenkins stepped forward, his hand instinctively going for his weapon. His mind was racing. Was she in danger? Or was she about to cause trouble? Before he could get any closer, the man lunged forward, his fist swinging toward the woman's face. It happened so fast, but she was ready. In a swift motion, she sidestepped the punch and grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it with a strength that sent a jolt of shock through Jenkins' spine. The man yelped in pain, his body momentarily frozen as he tried to break free. Jenkins watched in stunned silence. The woman's movements were fluid, precise, and controlled. She wasn't just defending herself, she was taking command of the situation. The man stumbled back, clutching his wrist, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're not the only one who knows how to fight," she said, her tone cold and confident. The man's expression shifted from anger to fear. He took a few steps back, his hands raised in surrender. "What the hell are you?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenkins took another step forward, his heart racing. The scene was unfolding faster than he could process. The woman had handled herself with such skill, too much skill. He had seen fights before, but nothing like this. It was almost as if she had been trained for moments like this. Before he could reach them, the woman turned her gaze toward him, her eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her eyes, only that same unsettling calmness. "You're the cop from earlier," she said, her voice soft but filled with authority. Jenkins hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. How did she know? He didn't answer, his mind swirling with questions. The man on the ground scrambled to his feet and bolted, running down the alley and disappearing into the shadows. Jenkins watched him go, his thoughts scattered. The woman turned back to face him, her posture relaxed as if she hadn't just disarmed a man twice her size. She adjusted her hoodie and brushed the dirt off her pants. "You should really be more careful who you mess with," she said, her voice calm, almost like a warning. Jenkins opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He was still processing the shock of what had just happened. Who was she? "You know, I don't normally cause trouble," she continued, "but sometimes people need to learn that you can't mess with everyone." The tension in the air was thick, but she wasn't backing down. She was standing in front of him now, but she didn't look like someone who was afraid of anything, least of all a police officer. The air around Jenkins seemed to crackle with a strange energy as the woman stood before him, unyielding and confident. He still couldn't understand what was happening. The way she had taken control of the situation just moments ago, it was like she wasn't even human. She moved with such precision, with such force as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Jenkins took a step forward, his instincts screaming at him to do something, anything, but his body refused to comply. The woman's gaze never wavered, her eyes locked onto his like an unspoken challenge. "You're not what I thought you were," Jenkins finally said, his voice hoarse. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, as if he wasn't entirely sure what he was saying. The woman tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into the faintest of smirks. "And what did you think I was?" she asked, her voice dripping with a hint of amusement. Jenkins couldn't find the words to answer her. What was he supposed to say? That he had thought she was just a regular woman walking home? That he had assumed she would fall into line when he demanded it? She had shattered every expectation he had within moments. She was powerful, unshakable, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. The silence between them hung heavily in the air, broken only by the distant sounds of the city. Jenkins could feel his heart racing, but he didn't know if it was from fear, anger, or something else entirely. "So what now?" the woman asked, her voice casual but tinged with something else. "You gonna arrest me?" Jenkins snapped back to reality, his training kicking in despite the confusion swirling in his mind. He was a cop. He was supposed to be in control of these situations. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was beyond his grasp. There was something about her, something dangerous that made him question everything. "No," he said, his voice firmer now. "I'm not arresting you." The woman's eyes flashed with something, maybe satisfaction, maybe amusement, but Jenkins couldn't tell for sure. She stepped back, giving him a little space, but her presence was still overwhelming. "You should," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge. "You should arrest me. You should have done it hours ago when you had the chance." Jenkins frowned. "What the hell are you talking about?" She let out a breath as if she were considering whether or not to indulge him. "You think I'm just some ordinary woman," she said, her tone almost pitying. "But I'm not. You have no idea who I really am, do you?" Her words sent a shiver down Jenkins's spine. He had heard that phrase before, people who weren't what they seemed. But this time, it felt different. This woman wasn't a petty criminal or a run-of-the-mill suspect. There was something deeper, something darker beneath the surface. "I've seen a lot in my time," Jenkins muttered, his mind racing. "I've dealt with criminals, gangsters, even killers. But you, there's something about you. I don't know what it is, but something's off." The woman's lips curled into a smile. It was cold, calculated. "You don't know the half of it," she replied, her voice low, "but you're about to." Jenkins stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he scanned her face, trying to figure out what was going on. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced around, almost as if she were checking to see if anyone was watching them. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm not from around here, Officer Jenkins. I'm not who you think I am, and I'm definitely not someone you want to mess with." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His thoughts scrambled. How did she know his name? And why was she so sure of herself? Was she a threat, or was this some kind of game to her? Before Jenkins could respond, a car screeched to a halt behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. But it wasn't another person. It was a black SUV, its tinted windows reflecting the dim streetlights. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses despite the late hour. He exuded power, confidence, and danger. "Is everything all right, Miss Taylor?" the man asked, his voice smooth but authoritative. Jenkins's heart skipped a beat. "Miss Taylor, who the hell was this guy?" The woman Taylor apparently turned to face the man, her expression softening slightly. "Everything's fine, Charles," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I'm just taking a little stroll, but it seems like I've made an impression on Officer Jenkins here." Charles glanced at Jenkins, his eyes scanning him quickly. There was no recognition, no surprise, just a cool indifference. He then turned his attention back to Taylor, waiting for her next move. Jenkins didn't know what to think. What was going on? Who was she? And why was this man, this stranger, calling her by name? Taylor smiled again, but this time there was no amusement in it. Just a cold, calculating edge. "You see, officer," she said, her eyes locking with his, "you're just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle, a puzzle you're not equipped to solve." Jenkins' mind spun faster. This wasn't just a simple case of harassment. This was something bigger, something that was happening right under his nose, and he had no idea how deep it went. Charles stepped forward, his posture relaxed but imposing. "Miss Taylor has skills that you wouldn't understand. It's best if you leave it at that." Jenkins swallowed hard, his hand still hovering near his gun. The tension was unbearable. He had to make a decision. Should he leave, or should he press further? But before he could decide, Taylor spoke again, her voice low and almost sympathetic. "Trust me, officer. You don't want to make this a problem, for both of us." Jenkins felt the weight of her words settle on his chest. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing: this was far from over. Jenkins couldn't shake the tension in the air as he stood there, unsure of how to respond. The words that Taylor had spoken echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing second. "You don't want to make this a problem." It was a warning. But what kind of warning, and what exactly was the problem she referred to? Charles, still standing beside Taylor, gave him a last look, one that was cold and unreadable, before he stepped back toward the SUV. Taylor, on the other hand, didn't take her eyes off Jenkins for a second. "We'll be in touch, officer," she said softly, her voice carrying an undercurrent of finality. "I suggest you take some time to think about what you've seen tonight. You're not ready for what's coming, but you will be eventually." Without another word, she turned, her figure cutting through the dim light as she followed Charles to the waiting vehicle. The SUV's engine revved to life, and with a smooth purr it pulled away, leaving Jenkins standing alone in the alley. He stood there, staring after them for what felt like an eternity. But the eerie silence of the night settled back in, wrapping around him like a cold shroud. It was like something had just been set in motion, and he was powerless to stop it. His mind raced, but he couldn't make sense of any of it. Who were they? What did they want? How had Taylor known so much about him? Why was she so sure of herself? Jenkins shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his brain. This wasn't just about some random woman anymore. There was something far bigger at play, something he was now caught in the middle of. But the question that kept gnawing at him was why? The sound of his radio crackling to life again broke his thoughts. It was dispatch, but this time, the voice was different, hushed, almost urgent. "Unit 23, come in. Officer Jenkins, are you there? Over." He grabbed the radio with a quick swipe, his hand trembling slightly. "Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?" There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end spoke again, low and serious. "We've got a report of a car accident on Main Street. Looks like multiple vehicles are involved, but we've got more than just an accident here. It's suspicious. We need you to check it out. Over." Jenkins felt his stomach drop. A car accident wasn't unusual, but the way dispatch spoke made it sound like there was more to this. He glanced down the dark street, his mind torn between the mysterious woman and the call for backup. "Copy that," he said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "I'm on my way." He climbed back into his patrol car, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. As the engine roared to life, Jenkins took one last look at the alley where Taylor and Charles had disappeared. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a random encounter. It was a sign. Something bigger, more dangerous, and it was now pulling him in. The drive to Main Street felt longer than it should have. The familiar streets seemed unfamiliar, as though the shadows were shifting in the corners of his vision, playing tricks on his mind. The more he thought about the night's events, the more disoriented he became. There was something about Taylor, her presence, the way she had moved, the way she spoke that unsettled him. He couldn't place it, but his instincts told him this wasn't just a woman he had arrested, or a suspect he'd encountered. There was power there, real power. And as much as Jenkins hated to admit it, he was scared. He arrived at the scene a few minutes later, the flashing lights of other squad cars illuminating the area. The intersection was blocked off, yellow tape stretching across the road, and officers were already on the scene. Jenkins parked his patrol car and got out, striding toward the chaos. A black sedan was crumpled against a streetlight, its front end smashed in, the airbags deployed. The other vehicle, a silver SUV, had its side completely caved in. Both cars were scattered with glass, metal, and debris. But what caught Jenkins's attention wasn't just the wreckage, it was the strange atmosphere surrounding the scene. The street was too quiet for the usual kind of accident. He approached one of the officers already there, a young man named Officer Garcia, who was standing by the SUV. "What's going on here?" Jenkins asked, his voice sharp. Garcia looked at him, his face pale. "It's weird, sir. There are no bodies, no blood. It's like the crash happened, but nobody's here, just the cars." Jenkins frowned. He turned his gaze to the wreckage, his gut tightening. "Where are the drivers?" Garcia shook his head. "That's the thing, sir. There's no sign of anyone in the cars. It's just empty." Jenkins felt a chill crawl up his spine. He walked over to the vehicles, scanning every inch for any sign of life. The wind howled through the street, carrying with it an eerie stillness. He reached out and gently touched the hood of the black sedan. Cold. Too cold for a crash that had just happened. Something was off. Something wasn't right. "Check the area," Jenkins ordered, his voice firm now. "Make sure there's no one else around. I don't care if you have to search the whole block." As the officers scattered to search, Jenkins remained by the wreckage, his thoughts racing. He kept glancing at the empty cars, the lifeless wreckage that had once been a part of someone's life. Who had been in these cars? Where had they gone? And why did this feel like it was all connected to her? Taylor. His mind flashed back to the alley, to her words, her strange calmness. She had warned him, "You're not ready for what's coming, but you will be, eventually." The words replayed in his head, each repetition sending a jolt of realization through his body. The pieces of this puzzle were starting to come together, but they were far from clear. The eerie silence of the accident scene stretched on as Jenkins stood motionless beside the wreckage. His mind was no longer focused on the cold cars or the lack of any victims. His thoughts were consumed by one thing: Taylor. Her words, her warning, the strange, almost prophetic way she had spoken to him. "You're not ready for what's coming, but you will be eventually." Jenkins ran a hand through his hair, trying to ground himself. This whole situation was unraveling in ways he couldn't understand. The accident was no ordinary wreck. It felt orchestrated, and it felt connected to her, Taylor. As he stood there trying to make sense of the chaotic web around him, a voice broke through the stillness. It was low, controlled, and as familiar as it was chilling. "You should have listened to me, Officer Jenkins." Jenkins whipped around, his pulse quickening as his hand instinctively reached for his gun. There, standing just outside the scene of the wreckage, was Taylor. She looked different now, calmer, more composed, almost as though she were waiting for something. Her gaze swept over the scene, and her lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jenkins demanded, his voice shaking, but he couldn't hide the mixture of fear and confusion that laced his words. Taylor met his gaze without hesitation, her eyes piercing into him. "I told you I'm not just some random woman, and I'm not someone you can easily forget either." Jenkins took a step forward, trying to control his breathing. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? You set this up. You've been watching me, everything I've done." Taylor didn't flinch. "I've been keeping an eye on you. Yes. But this isn't just about you, Jenkins. It's about the bigger picture, about what's coming next." His hands were shaking now. He couldn't grasp it. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. What was she talking about? "The bigger picture?" he repeated, his voice breaking. "What are you talking about? What is this about?" She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving him. "This city, the corruption, the lies, it's all connected, Jenkins. You've been playing your part in it without even knowing it. But now, it's your turn to see the truth." The truth. Jenkins felt like he was being suffocated by the weight of her words. Everything felt like it was spinning out of control. There had to be an explanation. This couldn't just be some sick game. "You think I'm part of some conspiracy? That I've been a puppet in someone else's plan?" Jenkins's voice was incredulous, almost mocking. "I'm a cop. I'm trying to do the right thing." Taylor shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and something darker. That's exactly what they want you to believe, the right thing. But they're pulling the strings, Jenkins, and you've been following orders without even realizing it. Jenkins swallowed hard, his throat dry. He felt like he was suffocating, like the walls were closing in around him. Who's pulling the strings? Who's behind this? For a moment, Taylor said nothing. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out something small, a sleek black device. She tossed it casually into the air, catching it again, and Jenkins couldn't help but watch. It was a subtle movement, but it carried weight. This wasn't just a woman in front of him anymore. She was someone else, someone powerful. Look at the bigger picture, Jenkins, she said softly. The city, the deals, the people in charge. You're just a small piece in a much larger game, but you're going to play a bigger role now, whether you want to or not. Jenkins's head was spinning. What does that even mean? What do you want from me? Taylor's lips curled into another smile, this one full of secrets. What I want from you? Nothing, really. What you need to understand, Jenkins, is that there's more happening here than you could ever imagine. People like you, they're being used, they're being manipulated into thinking they're doing the right thing, when in fact, they're just playing into the hands of a much darker force. He wanted to take a step back, to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by her words, by the weight of the situation. Why me? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Why are you telling me this? What do I have to do with it? Taylor finally took a step closer, her voice almost a whisper now. Because you're the only one left who can make a difference. You've been chosen, whether you like it or not. You've seen the cracks in the system. Now it's time for you to decide if you want to fix it, or if you want to be another pawn. Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning, with the promise of something much larger than either of them could comprehend. Jenkins didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to respond. His mind was a storm of confusion, anger and fear. What was she offering him? What did it all mean? But before he could ask another question, Taylor turned to leave, her steps light and confident, as though nothing in the world could stop her. You'll come around, Officer Jenkins, she said over her shoulder. You'll understand soon enough. And with that, she vanished into the night, leaving Jenkins standing in the wreckage, the broken cars, and the silence that followed. He was left alone, trapped in the middle of a story, much bigger than he could have ever imagined.